At Camp California, the late summer sun baked the firing range until it shimmered like molten glass. Dust rolled in thin, lazy swirls, and the air smelled faintly of gun oil and sweat. A row of Marines stood watching as Sergeant Cole walked toward the shooting line, a long rifle case slung across her shoulder. Her boots crunched on gravel, slow, deliberate, unbothered by the whispers trailing behind her. "She's the one they're testing," a voice murmured. "Yeah," another laughed, "the sniper girl." Heard them, of course. She always did. It wasn't the first base where disbelief followed her like a shadow. Some doubted her because of her size, 5'6", lean, quiet. Others doubted because of her gender. All of them doubted because they didn't know her story. Captain, the SEAL team commander, stood with his arms folded near the range tower, dark sunglasses hiding his eyes. He'd heard the talk too. A woman marksman. He didn't care either way. Skill was skill, but skill had to be proven. Knelt and unlatched her case. Inside gleamed her rifle, a customized M2010 enhanced sniper rifle, matte black, tuned to her exact specs. She'd named it Whisper. The weapon fit her like memory. She set it on the bench with reverence, as though placing a violin before a concert. "Sergeant Cole," the instructor called. "Target at 900 meters. Let's see what you've got." A few Marines chuckled. 900 meters was no easy shot, even for veterans. The wind that day shifted unpredictably across the open range, a playful trickster testing every shooter's patience. Lay prone, cheek pressed lightly against the stock, her eyes calm behind the scope. Through the glass, the world narrowed to crosshairs and breath. She slowed her pulse the way her father had taught her years ago in the freezing Montana woods. Feel your heartbeat fade until only stillness remains. "Ready when you are," the instructor said. She didn't answer. She adjusted her elevation knob 3 clicks, measured the flag's flutter for wind drift, and squeezed, slow, constant pressure, no jerk. The rifle exhaled. A second later, the steel target rang out, a crisp metallic ping echoing across the range. Silence, then someone muttered, "Lucky shot." Chambered another round, lips curved in a ghost of a smile. She adjusted 2 clicks left, breathed, fired again. Ping, perfect center. Captain raised an eyebrow. The smirks faded, but the tension remained, disbelief dressed as arrogance. She stood, dusted off her uniform, and began disassembling the rifle. "Anything else, sir?" "Negative," the instructor said, but stepped forward. "Hold up." His tone carried curiosity, not challenge. "You always shoot that calm." Looked at him, eyes gray like the mountain storm she'd grown up under. "Sir, calm's the only thing that listens." The crowd of Marines shifted uneasily. None of them could read her, this woman who spoke like the wind itself. Studied her face, finding no pride, no triumph, just focus. He'd seen combat veterans crumble under pressure, seen men boast their way into disaster. But this one, she radiated something else entirely, stillness. When the range cleared, remained behind, cleaning Whisper in silence. The others headed for the mess hall, voices fading with the sunset. She moved methodically, swab, oil, inspect, her hands steady even as laughter echoed faintly from the distance. In the cooling air, she whispered to herself, "Still your heartbeat, control the chaos," her father's mantra. Paused on the path back to base and looked over his shoulder. There she was, alone on the range, a small figure under the vast orange sky, a wisp of calm in a world built on noise. For a moment, he imagined her in the field. No audience, no ridicule, just the rifle and the horizon. He didn't know it yet, but that quiet discipline would one day rewrite everything he believed about precision, and about who belonged behind a sniper's scope. As darkness settled, packed her gear, slung her rifle, and walked past the spent shells gleaming in the dirt like fallen stars. The laughter was gone now, replaced by a silence thicker than respect. Tomorrow they'd forget her name again, whisper the same jokes, question her all over. That was fine. She didn't need them to believe, just to watch when the time came. And somewhere deep down, beneath layers of doubt and dust, Captain couldn't shake the thought. Maybe the quietest soldier on the range is the one you'll hear about forever. Montana winters were merciless, and that was exactly why her father loved them. He tell that the cold stripped away weakness, left only truth. Their small cabin sat near the edge of Glacier National Park, where the air smelled of pine and frost. Most kids her age were busy worrying about homework or school dances. At 12, was learning to hold her breath long enough to make her heartbeat vanish. "Still your pulse," her father would whisper. "You're not shooting at a target, Em. You're learning to listen to everything." He was a former Marine sniper, quiet and patient, a man who rarely raised his voice but always carried gravity. His lessons were simple: wind, range, control, humility. They practiced at dawn when fog hugged the valley, when the world was half asleep and the sound of a rifle cracked like thunder through the snow. At first missed often, she'd flinch or breathe too soon. Her father never scolded. He'd simply kneel beside her, adjust her grip, and make her start again. "You can't fight the wind," he'd say, eyes soft but firm. "You have to make friends with it." Years passed. By 16, she could hit a soda can from 500 yards away using an old hunting rifle. Her father smiled rarely, but that day he did, a small, proud curve of his lips that she'd remember forever. Then came the night everything changed. The storm rolled in fast, snow thick as sandpaper against the windows. Her father left for a supply run and never came back. The sheriff said his truck slid off an icy bridge. Didn't cry at the funeral. She just stood beside the folded flag, hands trembling against her sides. Something inside her turned to steel that day, cold, unbreakable. At 18, she enlisted. Boot camp was hell wrapped in discipline. The shouting, the sweat, the endless skepticism. Men stared at her like she'd wandered into the wrong war. One instructor tried to humiliate her during marksmanship drills. "You think you can shoot?" he sneered. "Try this." He handed her a rifle with a misaligned scope. She fired once. The bullet tore dead center. The range went silent. She didn't smile, didn't gloat. Just set the rifle down and said, "It's not the scope, sir, it's the shooter." From that day, whispers followed her, half awe, half resentment. Some said she was lucky. Others said she was unnatural. Ignored them all. Every insult became fuel, every doubt another reason to perfect her craft. Nights found her alone on the training range long after curfew, adjusting for wind, measuring humidity, studying the math of death and distance. She wasn't chasing glory, she was chasing peace. The stillness that came only when everything lined up, the crosshairs, the wind, the breath, the silence. One evening, while cleaning her rifle, she found her father's dog tags tucked in her gear. She didn't remember packing them. Maybe her mother had slipped them in before she left. She held the tags in her palm, the metal cool against her skin. "I'm still listening, Dad," she whispered. From that moment, her purpose sharpened. Years later, when the call came for advanced sniper training, she didn't hesitate. Her instructors couldn't deny her anymore. Her scores broke every range record. Her calm unnerved them. One officer said she was too quiet for combat. Another said she lacked aggression. But Captain, reviewing her file for a joint task force, noticed something the others missed. Every mission she'd simulated, every test she'd completed with flawless precision. No panic, no hesitation, just silence. He scribbled a note beside her name, "Underestimated asset." And that was the beginning of her real war. Not the one fought on distant battlefields, but the one against every preconception, every sneer, every laugh that tried to define her limits. Back at camp, she'd sometimes sit alone after drills, watching the ocean fade into twilight. The others went drinking or bragging. She stayed still, listening to the wind slide past her face, carrying echoes of Montana and her father's voice. "You can't fight the wind, Em. You listen to it. You let it guide the bullet home." She smiled softly. They didn't know it yet, but the storm they once mocked was learning to aim. The morning the orders came, the base was already buzzing. A mission briefing had been called at dawn, urgent, classified, and unlike any the unit had faced before. The corridor outside the operations room hummed with low voices and the metallic click of boots. Walked in silently, her uniform crisp, hair tied tight, expression unreadable. Captain stood by the tactical display, arms crossed. The projector hummed softly, painting shifting maps across the wall. "Take a seat, people," he said. His tone was calm but heavy, the kind that carried the weight of consequence. On the screen appeared satellite images of barren ridges and sharp valleys, a landscape painted in dust and heat. "This," began, "is western Iraq, roughly 50 miles from the Syrian border. Our target is a high-value individual Ghost Falcon. He's been responsible for multiple attacks against Allied convoys. Intelligence places him here." He pointed to a compound barely visible in the satellite feed. The room was silent. The distance between their projected position and the compound was staggering, over 3 kilometers. A Marine sniper in the back frowned. "Sir, that's impossible at that range. Even the rounds start to tumble after 2,500 meters." Didn't answer immediately. He looked at Sergeant Cole, he said. "You've hit what distance before?" 2,975 meters, she replied without hesitation. Her voice was steady, quiet, matter-of-fact. Murmurs rippled through the room, some disbelief, some admiration. Nodded. "We'll be moving at 400. Cole, you'll be Overwatch. The rest of you, infiltration and extraction. We'll only have one window before the target relocates again." A SEAL leaned forward, skeptical. "Sir, with respect, she's good, but this kind of shot, it's math and miracles." Gaze sharpened. "Then pray she's good at both." Said nothing. Inside, her pulse stayed calm, her thoughts already tracing the variables. Wind drift, humidity, spin drift, temperature, altitude. Each number became a rhythm, each equation a step toward inevitability. When the meeting ended, the others filed out, still muttering. She stayed behind, studying the topographic map projected on the wall, watched her from across the table. "Most people would said no," he said. "I'm not most people," replied softly. He studied her for a moment longer, then nodded. "You remind me of a sniper I worked with in Helmand. He said every bullet has a truth. It either finds its target or teaches you humility." His eyes didn't leave the map. "Then I plan to tell the truth, sir." Later that day, she spent 6 straight hours at the range. Every shot was preparation, not for aim, but for stillness. She adjusted her breathing, controlled her heartbeat, and forced her muscles into submission. Distance didn't scare her. Noise didn't matter. She'd been preparing for this since the frozen valleys of Montana. That evening, the sun bled orange across the horizon as she packed her rifle case. Whisper gleamed faintly under the fading light. She disassembled, cleaned, and rebuilt it piece by piece, the ritual of a soldier who trusted precision more than luck. Corporal, a younger spotter assigned to her for the mission, approached hesitantly. "They're saying this shot's a suicide mission," he said quietly. Looked up, her gray eyes calm. "Then it's a good thing I'm not planning to miss." Half smiled. "Ma'am, I hope you're right." "You'll learn something tomorrow," she said, standing. "That confidence doesn't come from believing you'll hit the target. It comes from knowing you've already accepted what happens if you don't." That night, as the base fell silent, lay awake staring at the ceiling. Her father's words echoed again. "Still your heartbeat. Control the chaos." Somewhere across the world, a man named Ghost Falcon was sleeping beneath a foreign sky, unaware that a calm wind had begun to stir, and that a woman he'd never heard of was already aligning her crosshairs 3,000 meters away. Tomorrow, the world would call it impossible. But Cole didn't believe in impossible. She believed in geometry, patience, and truth. And truth, when perfectly aimed, never missed. The convoy rolled out long before dawn, headlights dimmed to slits, engines humming under the desert's cold breath. Inside the lead Humvee, Sergeant Cole checked her gear in silence, scope caps off, bolt greased, ammo sorted with surgical precision. Every movement was measured, ritualistic. Across from her, Corporal sat clutching his spotter scope, glancing at her every few minutes like a man trying to memorize calm itself. They drove for hours, trading paved roads for dirt trails until civilization vanished behind endless waves of sand. The horizon burned pink as the first light of day crawled over the ridges. The temperature was already climbing, promising a day that would melt nerves and metal alike. Captain, seated up front, turned to the driver. "We're 2 clicks from the staging point. Once we offload, no chatter. Cole and set overwatch. The rest of us move to the perimeter." When they stopped, the wind screamed softly across the rocks, carrying a fine mist of grit that clung to everything. The air was thin and hot, but his breathing stayed steady. She crouched beside the gear crate, unlatched her rifle case, and pulled out Whisper. The matte black metal seemed to absorb the rising sun. The men carried heavier weapons, M4s, carbines, grenade launchers, but all eyes kept drifting to her rifle. It looked too delicate, too quiet to decide the fate of a mission. Approached, scanning the valley through his binoculars. "Target compounds roughly 3 clicks southeast. You'll have a clean line if you set up on that ridge." He pointed toward a jagged slope, sun-bleached and hostile. Nodded. "Elevation. 80 feet higher than the compound. You'll be shooting down angle, factor 1 degree. She didn't write it down. She never needed to. They climbed in silence, boots grinding over rock, the world around them vast and unforgiving. By the time they reached the ridge, sweat darkened their collars and the heat shimmered like invisible fire. Dropped to prone position immediately, scanning through her scope. The compound came into focus, a cluster of low buildings, weathered walls, a radio antenna slicing the sky. Tiny shapes moved, guards, routine patrols. She adjusted her focus again until each detail felt like a heartbeat away. Lay beside her, opening the range finder. 3147 meters, he whispered, all mixing with disbelief. "Noted," she murmured. She began calculations out loud, voice low and rhythmic. Temperature 98 Fahrenheit, humidity 7%, wind 5 knots east to west. She paused, adjusted 2 clicks. Corrosion negligible, pressure low, bullet drop estimated at, she tapped her pen against the notebook, roughly 89 feet. Blinked. "You can't even see 89 feet of drop." Smiled faintly. "That's why math does." Below them, the rest of the team prepared for infiltration. The radio crackled once, voice clipped and steady. "Overwatch, confirm visual." "Confirmed," she replied, line of sight clear. As the sun climbed higher, the mirage effect worsened. The air rippled, distorting distance and shape. Through the scope, the compound seemed to sway. Narrowed her eyes, breathing through the distortion, reading the rhythm of the heat like a second language. "Wind shifting," warned. "I see it." She adjusted again, calm as ever. "Wait until late afternoon. The air stabilizes before sunset." Frowned. "That'll be cutting it close." Perfection always does. Hours bled away. The desert changed colors from gold to amber to red, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Stayed motionless, every muscle locked. The rifle became part of her body, the scope an extension of her eye. Checked in again near dusk. Cole status. "Stable," she said. "Target patterns confirmed, awaiting shot opportunity." He hesitated, then replied quietly, "Understood. Take it when you know." As twilight painted the valley in copper and shadows, his finger brushed the trigger, not to fire, but to remind herself what patience felt like. Below, the compound lights flickered on. Somewhere inside, her target was moving into position. The world was shrinking to a single breath, a single heartbeat, a single shot waiting to be written into history. And above the desert, the wind began to calm, just as she'd said it would. Twilight draped the desert in red and violet as the heat bled away from the stones. For 12 relentless hours, Sergeant Cole hadn't moved more than an inch. Her elbows dug into the sand, steady as roots. Every sound sharpened, the tick of the scope adjustment, the wind sigh through broken rocks, the faint hum of distant insects. Corporal lay beside her, glassing the compound through the spotter's scope. Sweat streaked the dust on his forehead. "We've been here all day," he whispered. "I can't feel my legs." "Good," murmured, "means you're still alive." He chuckled weakly, then focused again. "Movement, north balcony, that's him." His heart slowed, not quickened. Through her scope she saw him, the man they called Ghost Falcon, a bearded figure in desert robes surrounded by guards. He stepped onto the balcony and leaned on the railing, scanning the horizon, unaware that death was already watching. "Range confirmed?" she asked quietly. Exhaled, 3147 meters. Wind 5 knots cross steady. Mirage minimal now. This is your window. The valley seemed to tighten around them. The sun slipped below turning the sky to molten gold. Adjusted her elevation, dialed windage, and calculated the effect. Earth's rotation twisting the bullet's path over distance. 3,000 meters, whispered. "You'll have to hold 4.2 mils for drop." "I know." Her tone was calm, almost soft. "Hold spotter ready." Her left hand gripped the stock gently, her right index finger resting against the trigger like a feather. She closed one eye, steadying her breath until her pulse faded. Captain voice cracked over the comm. "Cole, confirmed target." "Confirmed, sir. Clear sight, stable wind." There was a pause, then quieter. "That's over 3 clicks, Sergeant, you sure?" Smiled faintly, her cheek pressed to the stock. "Yes, sir, the air's holding. It's now or never." She could feel the team below her holding their breath. The wind fluttered, then stilled. She counted silently, 1, 2, 3, until the world froze. In that stillness she felt her father's voice in the back of her mind. "Still your heartbeat. Control the chaos." The target turned slightly, facing west, shifted half a degree right. Whispered, "Wind's perfect." "Then so is the shot." She squeezed the trigger. The rifle cracked, a single thunderclap swallowed by the desert. The recoil was gentle, precise. She didn't blink. The bullet sliced through the hot air, spinning faster than thought. 3 seconds passed. Then came the faintest puff on the balcony, barely visible through the scope. The man dropped, silent. One guard turned, confused. Another shouted. The entire balcony erupted in chaos. His mouth fell open. "Hit confirmed." He blinked, his voice breaking. 3147 meters impact center mass, my God. Static filled the comm for a heartbeat, then voice. "Cole, say again. Did you just confirm a kill at 3,100 meters?" "Confirmed, sir," she replied, still calm. "Target neutralized." "Holy hell," someone muttered over the line. Reloaded automatically, her hand steady. "Secondary target check," she asked. Shook his head, grinning in disbelief. "They're scattering. He stopped himself. "You just made history." She didn't answer. The adrenaline didn't rush. It flowed cold and quiet, like the river beneath Montana ice. Down below, the SEAL team began extraction procedures. Stood in the command tent, headset pressed to his ear, silent for a long moment. Then, softly, "Good shot, Sergeant." His eyes stayed on the scope. "Thank you, sir. Permission to." "Granted. You've done enough for one lifetime." As they packed their gear, the horizon bled into deep blue. The desert wind whispered again, gentle, approving. Couldn't stop glancing at her. "I'll never forget that sound," he said quietly, "like the world exhaled after you fired." Slung whisper over her shoulder, watching the compound lights flicker in the distance. "That wasn't the world exhaling," she replied. "It was disbelief dying." The laughter that had followed her for years was gone now, buried somewhere in the sand, replaced by awe and silence. And silence, thought, was always the truest applause. The desert night wrapped the world in darkness, broken only by starlight and the low hum of engines. The convoy rumbled back toward base, headlights off, each man inside the vehicle silent, still processing what had happened on that ridge. The silence wasn't fear. It was disbelief trying to find words. Captain sat across from in the back of the lead Humvee. He kept stealing glances at her like a man trying to make sense of an optical illusion that refused to fade. She was polishing the barrel of her rifle, slow and methodical, her expression unreadable. Finally, he broke the silence. 3,147 meters, he said quietly. That's further than any confirmed U.S. shot in history. Didn't look up. It was just math, sir. Wind, gravity, rotation. Shook his head. Don't sell that short. I've seen men miss at 500. Sitting beside her, laughed softly, shaking his head. You made a bullet dance through a mile and a half of wind and heat like it had GPS. Smirked faintly. Maybe it just wanted to find its way home. When they arrived back at Forward Operating Base Claymore, word had already spread. Technicians, snipers, and rookies alike lined the walkways, pretending to work while sneaking glances. The rumor had traveled faster than the bullet itself. A woman sniper from the Montana National Guard just broke the record. The debriefing room was tense. Sat across from her, arms folded, a laptop open beside him. The video feed from the drone replayed in silence. The shot, the pause, the tiny flicker of the impact on the balcony. Even through grainy footage, the precision was haunting. He stopped the playback and leaned forward. Tell me, Sergeant, how did you read the wind? The sensors picked at 6 knots, but your correction was for 5. Shrugged, the sensors were reading from low altitude. The wind was softer. I watched the heat mirage fade half a degree right, not left. That's how I knew. Leaned back, exhaling. You watched the mirage? Yes, sir. Air bends light before it bends a bullet. He blinked. That's poetic. Just physics, sir. For the first time in years, the SEAL commander smiled, not mocking, not forced. You know, Cole, when they assigned you to us, I thought it was a PR stunt, a token move. But that shot changed everything. Met his eyes, calm but firm. With respect, sir, that's why I took it. He nodded slowly, closing the laptop. Report. Already been sent to Central Command. Word is it's going to make its way to the Pentagon by morning. Grinned. Guess we'll be famous before breakfast. Shook her head. Fame fades faster than smoke. That night she sat alone outside the barracks, watching the desert stars blink overhead. The air was cool now, almost kind. Her rifle rested beside her, cleaned and silent. She could still feel the trigger's echo in her bones, the instant where time held its breath. Joined her quietly, handing her a mug of instant coffee. You don't seem excited, he said. She smiled faintly. Excitement for when you almost miss. He laughed, then fell quiet. You know, back home, they're gonna turn this into a legend. The girl who hit the impossible shot. Took a sip, her eyes on the horizon. Let them. Legends make people listen. Maybe the next girl won't have to prove she belongs. Inside the command tent, sent his official report. At the bottom, he hesitated before typing the final line. This operation confirms Sergeant Cole's exceptional marksmanship beyond any precedent. Her precision was not luck, it was mastery. He paused, then added one more sentence. I underestimated her. I will not make that mistake again. Back outside, the wind stirred again, carrying whispers of distant sand. Closed her eyes and listened. Somewhere out there, beyond the horizon, her bullet was still traveling, through stories, through disbelief, through history itself. And for the first time, she allowed herself a small, tired smile. The shot was over, but the echo had only just begun. By the time the team returned to U.S. soil, Cole's name had already become a storm. News outlets were running with headlines like American Woman Sniper Makes Longest Kill in History and 3,147 meters, the shot heard around the world. Military analysts were dissecting her precision, politicians were tweeting her praises, and skeptics were hunting for flaws. At Fort, she walked through the gates like a ghost among cheering crowds. Cameras flashed, soldiers saluted, and journalists shouted questions she didn't care to answer. The noise felt louder than the shot itself. Captain followed close behind, uncomfortable with the media frenzy. "You good, Sergeant?" he asked under his breath. "Just tired, sir." He nodded. "Press wants an interview. Pentagon wants a photo op. They're calling it the shot of the century." His jaw tightened. It was a mission, not a movie. Still, she stood where they told her, smiled when they asked, and repeated the approved line. It was teamwork. But in truth, she hated the spotlight. She hadn't fired for glory. She'd fired because no one else could, and because people doubted she ever would. That night, she found herself in a small office lined with awards she didn't feel she'd earned. A reporter from the Washington Post sat across from her, recorder on. "Sergeant Cole," he began, "how does it feel to be the first woman to make the longest confirmed kill shot in U.S. military history?" Looked at him, expression steady. "It feels like another day I did my job." The reporter blinked. "You don't think it's history?" "History? What people make of it after you're gone." He smiled awkwardly. "Fair enough. Do you think this will change perceptions of women in combat?" She hesitated. "I think it'll make them talk, but talk doesn't change much unless someone else takes the next shot." When the article came out 2 days later, the headline read, "She just did her job. The calm heroism of Sergeant Cole." The nation devoured it. Young girls wrote letters to her unit. Veterans debated her calculations online. Some called her a hero, others accused her of luck or exaggeration. Conspiracy threads popped up overnight, people claiming the footage was doctored. Called her into his office the following week. "They're still arguing about whether your shot was even possible," he said, sliding a laptop across the table. "Physics professors are posting videos explaining how it could work." Smirked faintly. "Good, let them learn something." He chuckled. "You've got no idea how much this shook the system. Half the brass are proud, the other half are terrified." "Why terrified?" she asked. "Because you changed the playbook. They can't laugh off women on the range anymore." Fell quiet, staring at the American flag on the wall. For years, she'd fought twice as hard for half the respect. Now suddenly she was a symbol, and symbols she knew weren't people, they were targets in disguise. A week later, she was invited to Washington. The Pentagon ceremony was broadcast live. She stood on stage in her dress uniform as a general pinned the Distinguished Service Cross to her chest. Cameras clicked. Applause roared. When it quieted, the general leaned close and whispered, "You've done something that will outlive all of us." Nodded politely, but her eyes stayed forward. She wasn't thinking about medals or records. She was thinking about the ridge, the silence, the wind, how still it had been in that one perfect second. That night, as she returned to her hotel room, called, "You see the news?" "Trying not to." He laughed. "Too late. They're calling you the whisper of the desert." Chuckled softly. "Could been worse." "Yeah," he said, "could been forgotten." For a long moment neither spoke, then said quietly, "Heroes fade, but what they do sometimes that sticks around." As she hung up and looked out over the city lights, she realized something. Her shot wasn't just measured in meters. It was measured in the distance between disbelief and respect. And for once in her life, that distance finally felt closed. Months passed and the noise began to fade. The reporters stopped calling, the cameras turned elsewhere, and the name Sergeant Cole became a story shared more often in classrooms than on screens. She didn't mind the silence. In fact, she'd been waiting for it. After 22 missions, requested an honorable discharge. She'd seen enough dust, enough blood, enough doubt turned into applause. The army tried to keep her, but she knew better. Heroes were celebrated until they weren't needed anymore. Back in Montana, the air was colder, sharper, quieter. Her family ranch sat at the edge of an open plain where the horizon stretched endlessly, like the desert, but alive. She unpacked one box at a time. Medals she hadn't asked for, a uniform that no longer fit, and the rifle she once called Whisper. She hung it on the wall, not as a weapon but as a reminder. Every evening she sat on the porch, watching the sun sink over the hills. The stillness reminded her of that ridge, the moment before she pulled the trigger and history bent just a little. One evening she heard tires crunching down her gravel drive. A black SUV stopped near the fence. Captain stepped out, older, a touch of gray at his temples. He smiled when he saw her. "You really traded sand for snow, huh?" he said. "Snow doesn't shoot back," she replied. They sat in silence for a while, the wind whistling through the grass. Finally, he reached into his jacket and handed her a folder. "Thought you should see this." Inside were photos, women in uniform training at long-range sniper schools across the country. At the top of the page, Operation Advanced Female Sniper Program. Nodded. "They built it because of you. You opened a door they didn't even know was locked." Stared at the pictures. Young faces, confident, focused, hands steady on rifles. "They'll do better than I did," she said softly. "They'll do it because you did." She closed the folder carefully. "I didn't do it for a program." "I know," he said. "You did it because you had something to prove, and now they don't." They talked for hours. About war, about the silence after, about how even the truest shots echo forever in strange ways. When he finally left, walked back inside and looked once more at Whisper on the wall. It gleamed faintly in the fatting light, almost alive. Weeks later, she received a letter postmarked from. Inside was a photo of a young woman in fatigues, grinning beside a target riddled with perfect center shots. On the back, in neat handwriting, were 7 words. "Because you proved we could, I tried." Smiled. That night she drove to the old shooting range near the river. The targets were worn and peeling, the benches weathered, but it felt right. She brought only 1 bullet, not to test her aim, but to say goodbye. She loaded the rifle, aimed at a rusted steel plate 400 yards out, and took a deep breath. The world around her grew still again, just like before. Then she whispered, "One last time," and pulled the trigger. The echo rolled across the valley, fatting into the mountains like a heartbeat retreating into memory. She lowered the rifle and exhaled slowly. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like a soldier or a legend. She just felt human, free of weight, free of noise. As she packed up and turned toward the horizon, the setting sun painted the plains gold. Somewhere out there, new hands would steady new rifles. New stories would be written. And though Cole would never step onto another battlefield, the wind carried her legacy across the distance 3,147 meters and beyond. Not as a record, not as a myth, but as proof that even silence can make history when it's followed by one perfect shot.